and boom goes the dynamite.
Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to today's edition of Daily Dive. I'm your host, Renee Washington. We've got producer Mike joining us, as well as a guest on later today, Brendan McDaniel, Rochester Knighthawks analyst. We've got a lot to get into today. Coming up on Daily Dive, we've got to talk our power rankings. We'll be getting into what's going on in Rochester. And of course, we've got our top story presented by the Daily Dive store. You can check out the link not only in our social media bios, but also here on your screen. You can click that QR code. I'm going to do my best Vanna White impression. Click that QR code and check out all the merchandise we have at our Daily Dive store. Top story for today. Let's talk some statistics, some numbers, some history. Callum Crawford is on the verge of some NLL history of his own. Hopefully, Callum Crawford will be able to join us on the show shortly to talk about it. But he currently leads the league with 36.8 shooting percentage. The minimum of that, 45 shots on goal. And his record is closing in on the record set by John Tavares at 43.6 in the 2009 season. So Callum has the opportunity to be the second highest. I don't know if he'll pass John ever. I don't know if anybody will pass John in anything. We've talked about John Tavares on the show in the past with the GOAT conversation. But Callum Crawford making some noise and making some history. Producer Mike? Exciting times.
Right. So I want to give a shout out to Graham Perro, who does analyststats.com, because I was thinking about like how Callum Crawford, I was looking at the shooting percentages, I was like, this is kind of high. But like 36.8 is pretty high. So I kept going back in time and like seeing like of the players, like we like to 45 shots on goal, was like 5 shots on goal per game, basically. And I was like, this is pretty high. And I kept looking back and no one else did it besides John Tavares. In fact, since it went to 18 games, this would be the highest.
Ooh.
So which is even cooler, although John Tavares had like a bunch of shots on goal anyways. It's still pretty interesting that Callum Crawford is doing, because in New York he was looking pretty good, but Panther City, he's put them over the top maybe. I mean, they look good with him, and he scored 5 this past weekend, but it was an interesting stat. I don't think it's talked about enough shooting percentages.
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at goals, assists, another big stat, shots on goals, shooting percentage, because that means you are consistently generating offense for your team. And as we know, you cannot score goals if you're not shooting. You cannot win games if you're not scoring goals. So Callum Crawford has been impressive. We talked about that 5-goal performance this past weekend. Ever since moving to Panther City, he continued what he started in New York and has been playing some fantastic lacrosse. So interesting that you mentioned, had we just looked at the 18-game season, this would be the number 1 overall shooting percentage. But something to be said about Callum Crawford, and hopefully, like I mentioned, we can have him on the show very, very soon here on Daily Dive to talk about it. Well, as you talk about Panther City, they are the only team besides the Bandits with 2 players that are at 50 or more points so far in the season. So Will Malcolm and Jonathan Donville sitting in the top 7 across the league in scoring. When you look at that list, Dane Smith is still at number 1 for points, but Jeff Teat, Tom Schreiber, and then at number 4, Will Malcolm, Connor Fields at number 5, who we'll talk about later on the show, Josh Bird at number 6, and Jonathan Donville at number 7. So those are the only 7 players across the league with 50 or more points. The top 7, obviously, in points. With that being said, 2 from the Bandits, 2 from the Panther City Lacrosse Club.
I'd like to say that Panther City, when you combine the fact they've got the only other teammates besides Buffalo, and Buffalo might be the best team, hence the power rankings later on, they also have the goalie in Damoud. So it's not like they don't have a back end, and they just added Callum Crawford. And when we talked about Panther City getting Callum Crawford, it was more about New York, like what are they doing? And now it's like, did Panther City low-key build a contender?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because Jonathan Donville's like a really good rookie. Like, it's going to come close to Jeff Teat's points record, I believe. Will Malcolm, 23 years old, balling out. This right here with Callum Crawford is something special. And I've been disrespectful to this team. They're 5-4.
Yeah, I mean, look, Will Malcolm and Jonathan Donville did clean up the weekly honors. I believe it was like week 1. Jonathan Donville, who we did talk about in our show yesterday, just got the 4th Rookie of the Week honors for weekly play. And when you look at the way these two have been playing, and you talk about Callum Crawford, it's a great point you bring up. We've been talking so much about Callum Crawford in the sense of how it impacts New York and the Riptide's overall team. But we haven't talked about enough how it impacts Panther City and helps them. And Panther City, and I know we're going to get into our power rankings later, Panther City is one of 2 teams that I have in their respective conference, a team to watch that is quietly making some noise, what I would truly call a sleeper. And that's going to surprise some people. As we talk about being a contender, absolutely going to surprise some people as the season goes on. We'll get into that much more, but to think about them as a contender, I think at this point, sitting at 5-4 for Panther City and having players that are producing, that are scoring, that are top of the league, that are cleaning up weekly honors, you've got to wonder if Panther City is going to be passing some teams in standings and climbing up the ranks. Well, another fun fact, Ian McKay is the only player in the NLL that has over 10 caused turnovers and over 10 goals scored. So when you talk about making an impact as a two-way player, Ian McKay could arguably be the best, if not one of the best two-way players in the league when you just look at the overall impact that Ian McKay has had. Do you think Ian McKay is the best two-way player in the league?
Unfortunately, no. I think that is still, I believe, what is it, Josh? It's one of the Couriers. I think it's Josh Courier. And maybe the other guy. But anyway, the guy in Calgary, okay? So it's interesting, though, because he's got 9 goals. And I thought, well, it's 2 guys with, 20 or more points, but it's 1 guy who's got the 10 goals. So I thought this was a nice clickbait, but at the same time, it's an interesting stat that he's actually got the 10 goals. So I thought
very interesting.
He's got an argument.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Couriers in Calgary definitely have something to say about that. We'll keep an eye on the development and conversation around if we were to say most valuable two-way player of the league, who that would be, because numbers don't lie, as we've talked about here on Daily Dive. And I'm not huge on solely reading into this just statistics, but it's definitely something
It
that
is
we
Zach,
keep
by
an
the
eye
way.
on.
It's Zach, my bad. So I had to look that up real quick.
No, I like it. It makes you think, and it's something that deserves to be discussed. It's more, obviously, we're talking about top points holders, but also when you look at the other stats, caused turnovers is a big stat. You're helping your team get possessions. You're helping your team get more, like you're forcing defensively some errors, so now you can get more offensive looks. These are things that people don't talk enough about. So we do have to get into something else that's been talked about pretty frequently here on Daily Dive, the Rochester Knighthawks. Joining us after this break, we've got Brendan McDaniel, the Knighthawks analyst, joining us as our big guest by Fanatics. Stay tuned for more here on Daily Dive. Welcome back to Daily Dive. I'm your host, Renee Washington, and producer Mike and I had the opportunity to talk through what we've been seeing with the statistics coming into this week. But here on the Daily Dive, it's now time for our big guest by Fanatics, Brendan McDaniel, Knighthawks analyst, to be joining us and having a chance to talk about the Knighthawks, especially as they've had a chance to get back in the win column. Brendan, can you hear me okay? Welcome to the show. Maybe not. No worries. I'm not sure, but Brendan is here in the building. We'll give Brendan a moment to see if we can get his mic working and possibly his camera working. But as we've talked about here on Daily Dive many times, the Knighthawks did start off the season undefeated. They were the last unbeaten team to drop a loss in the NLL. And as we get ready to have Brendan McDaniels join us, hopefully he can leave and come back, we have to talk about the last few weeks. They dropped back-to-back losses. Then they got back in the win column this past weekend with a nice win over Halifax, winning by a pair of goals. And so with that, the Knighthawks are a team that we absolutely have to keep an eye on. And Brendan, hopefully I can get some sound from you and hear you clearly. Welcome to Daily Dive. Bummer. Okay, I cannot hear Brendan right now, but we will get this fixed. I think we will have to work through some tech issues. It happens sometimes. Producer Mike, in the meantime, what are your thoughts on the Knighthawks so far and what we saw in their redemption win over Halifax this past weekend?
Whew. That's how I felt. I was like, oh boy, I'm so glad they got a win. Because, when you lose 2 games in a row after that, you have to wonder. You have to wonder if it's like going to get in your head, okay, we started hot, now we're not hot. So it was just like a sigh of relief. They're back. Okay, so Halifax team is not bad, by the way.
Nope.
So, yeah.
Halifax is my other team, along with Panther City, that is a team to watch because I feel like Halifax is a sleeper team that has already surprised some people, especially in that win over Rochester a few weeks back. But as a team that's, as the season goes on, something you have to keep an eye on. Third time's a charm, Brendan McDaniels. Welcome to Daily Dive. I believe we can hear you now. No, we cannot. Okay, no problem. Well, with that, let's take a quick beat to give Brendan a chance to see if we can get this figured out because we want to get a chance to talk about the Knighthawks. They've been a team to watch so far this season, and we'll take a quick break and be back here on Daily Dive with Brendan McDaniels. Fingers crossed, do your good technology dance, and let's hope we can get him on the show in just a moment. Welcome back to Daily Dive, our big guest by Fanatics, where you can check out NLL merchandise and the link in our social media bio. Our guest for today, Brendan McDaniels, Knighthawks analyst. We can see you. That is progress, and I believe now we can hear you. Brendan, welcome to the show. Fourth time.
Fourth time is a charm. Thanks so much for having me, Renee. I appreciate it.
Of course. Happy to have you here. Look, we have been talking about the Knighthawks a lot on the show, so I'm excited as the analyst of the team to be able to have you here to break it down. Now, let's start with the undefeated start that they had. Start off 6-0, surprised a lot of people. What did you learn about the Knighthawks and the way they started off this season?
I think the thing that we learned is that when you bring in kind of an alpha dog like Connor Fields, who has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and you get some more offense, things start to click. And again, it was another year of them being mature. And this is the process that Dan Carey had talked about. And he said, listen, it's going to take some time. Yes, sometimes expansion teams are really good overnight. Other times it takes a little bit of time for teams to gel, but you've got to get that one guy who's kind of the face of your franchise, the face of your offense to come in. And that was Connor Fields. And I mean, Connor Fields has made a huge difference. And Rylan Hartley is another one. And you talk to him, Rylan Hartley is a young guy. He's still a young goalie, but this year, what's different from years past is he's letting the game come to him. He's a little bit more relaxed. He's not trying to do too much, and he's seeing the ball so much better. He's making such better decisions. So when you get that number one guy on offense, and then you've got a guy who's becoming an elite backstop, everything kind of comes together a little bit, and that's how they got off to that hot start.
Yeah. Huge swing from last season. And you talk about just having that composure, that confidence, and then also being able to bring in a player and have a player like Connor Fields that you can rely on. Obviously, leads the team in production. But when you look across this roster, there's been a number of players. You talked about Rylan Hartley, Holden Katoni, who we've had on the show, Ryan Smith, a number of players that have been able to step up. And we've also mentioned how the Nighthawks have been winning by committee. Yes, we can point to what Connor Fields has been doing so far this season, but when you also look at their success, it's been a number of players being able to step up. Now, what do you think was the difference, I should say, in those back-to-back losses to Halifax and to the Bandits that was it maybe just time for them to take a step back and reset? Was it just time to lose? I hate to say it. Or was there something specific you noticed that was different in those 2 weeks versus the other 7 victories that we've seen from them?
Yeah, I mean, just like anything, I mean, all good things come to an end. I mean, we didn't think that the Rochester Nighthawks were going to be undefeated throughout the season. We knew they were going to lose at some point, and we got kind of spoiled a little bit because I don't think we all expected here in Rochester that the Nighthawks were going to be good, but we didn't think that they were going to be that good coming off the bat. The win against Toronto was huge in the early going, and that was one that I kind of looked at and said, this is going to be a measuring stick game, and there's a couple others, but and then when they beat the Bandits for the first time, like, okay, now people know that this team is legit, and people know that they got to bring their A game against Rochester every single time. And as well as anybody else, when you're playing Buffalo and Buffalo, you're playing Halifax and Halifax, those are hard games. Those are hard cards to play in, and it was only a matter of time. But they just didn't play well against Halifax a couple weeks ago. It was 17-7. It was just a bad game. And you're going to have those. In an 18-game season, you're going to have bad games. And Dan Carey, the general manager, talked about getting back to the process. Let's not try to do too much. Let's run our offense. Let's buckle down a little bit on defense. Let's react. And remember, I mentioned that Rylan Hartley is a young goalie. They were able to get on him a little bit early. He got frustrated. He didn't finish the game against Halifax. He got pulled with about 10 and a half minutes to go. And they're all life lessons, and he learned from that. And so when Halifax came to town this past weekend, it was a different Rylan Hartley that you saw. In shoot around, he was different. Prior to the game, he was different. He knew, like, okay, they might get on a couple runs for me. There's going to be some adversity. I just got to work my way through it. I got to keep believing in the system. I got to remember that. And Dan Carey talks about the process a lot. Stay with the process. Remember the process. And again, there's a lot of people when they went into this 2 games against Buffalo, 2 games against Halifax. There's a lot of outsiders that said, listen, Rochester's about to go 0-4 on this stretch, so they're going to have to suck it up and they're going to have to climb back into this race. So the fact that they went 2-2 in those 4 games is about where I expected them to be, and thought, best case scenario is going 4-0, but it's probably not going to happen. But if they can come out of this hard 4-game stretch 2-2, that's going to be a really good situation, because they'll sit at 7-2, which they're at now. They're going to tie for first place, and they've got wins against the top teams. They've got to win against Buffalo. They've got to win against Toronto. They've got to win against Halifax. And now you get into this later part of the season where they got a couple games with Philly, a couple games with Albany, some games against Georgia. And so, but this is now a time where, Rochester has beaten the really good teams one time already. Now, the teams that are behind you to hold pace, you've got to take care of business against those guys. And so it'd be an interesting stretch for Rochester now coming up that you don't want to see any letdowns. And that's going to come back to what we talked about is, that by committee. If Connor Fields isn't having a big night, Holden Katoni can step up. Ryan Smith can step up. Curtis Knight can step up. I mean, he's another guy that not a lot of people talk about, who's a huge contributor to the offense. Austin Hazen, who's a rookie, he's a guy that can step up offensively. And this is a good, solid defense that they have. And like I said, with the continued maturation of Rylan Hartley, I love him in the backstop. And I feel confident with Rochester in any game, because I've seen how his game has progressed over the last couple of years, that he is now that goalie that's ready to step up and be one of the top goalies in the league.
Yeah, he's definitely been showing it, and you just see the way that Hartley's been playing in net. It's been remarkable. And also offensively, having different players. I know you mentioned Curtis Knight and Thomas Hogarth, different players that can, as we say, step up and help them win by committee. But I have to ask, obviously Connor Fields sitting just over 50 points on the season so far. Him, Holden Katoni with over 20 goals, 20 assists as of this week. Who is the MVP, though, through the first 9 games in the 7-2 start? Is it Rylan Hartley? Is it Connor Fields? Is it maybe somebody else that really is the backbone of this team and their success?
It's a tough question. I mean, obviously, all eyes go directly to Connor Fields because he's scored so much, and he's top five in the offensive categories. He's the number one goal scorer in the league. But you know, he's been a huge part of this, and so is Rylan Hartley. And you can really go either way because without Rylan Hartley as that backstop, they're not the same team. But also, you take out Connor Fields and the production that he's had, his ability to draw double teams. That's a huge thing. When you talk about value, both of these guys have value. They bring different value to the team. And that's the interesting thing. Like Craig Rybczynski and I talked about on the broadcast last week, was that the ability, if you're going to double Connor Fields, then you've got to worry about Ryan Smith, and you got to worry about Holden Cattoni and Curtis Knight, Austin Hayes, and Thomas Holgarth, who you mentioned. But then if you don't double team Connor Fields, then he's going to get his points. He's going to get his goals. He's going to get his assists. He's going to feed. And for me, the biggest difference as I look back from this year to last year, the biggest difference is that offensive spark. Rochester struggled a lot last year on offense, trying to find their offensive identity. Connor Fields has brought that identity to them this year and has been able to not only produce himself, but also get everybody else involved. So for me, of course, I'm biased. I think Connor Fields should be the MVP of the league at this point right now. Other people disagree, and that's okay. But if I had to pick one, I would say it's Connor Fields.
Connor Fields, you're saying not only MVP of the team, but tied at number one for goals across the league with Jeff Teat at 28. Definitely in the conversation for MVP of the league, especially with the way Rochester has been playing. As you mentioned, offensively, when you have a guy who can consistently score, get assists, help you get on the scoreboard, it does allow for your defense and for your goalie and Rylan Hartley to have more confidence that they can rely on them. So there's obviously goal scoring is such a big stat, but there's more to what that provides, as you're talking about, that has helped Rochester turn the corner. So my last question for you, and I appreciate all this insight you're giving us, Brendan. Now having got that redemption win against Halifax, a close one, they're back in the win column. Yes, you'd love to have a winning streak to continue the rest of the season, but overall, what does this team need to do to continue just being successful? The bigger picture is postseason. It's winning the conference, it's getting into the postseason and winning out, right? So Rochester's obviously in the conversation as a contender for a title this year. What do you think it's going to take for this team in the longevity of this season to remain successful?
I know this is going to kind of be a boring answer, but I'll expound it a little bit. They got to keep doing what they're doing. And what they've been doing is they've been playing with confidence. They've been playing with heart. They've been playing with togetherness. I mean, all these guys, they truly care about each other. And someone was asking me a couple of weeks ago, and they said, what about Ryan Smith? Is he upset that he's not the number one option? And the answer was no. Ryan Smith loves his position on this team. He loves the fact that Connor Fields is here. They've gotten very close. They're close in training camp. And at the end of the day, this offense, they don't care who scores. They just want to score. It doesn't matter whether you get the goal, you get the first assist, the second assist, or you made, it was 4 passes ago, or you didn't get a touch on that offensive end. This group doesn't care. And that's the really cool part about it, is that it doesn't matter if Connor Fields is the number one today or Holden Cattoni is. And, on defense too, it's a good defensive unit led by Paul Dawson, who's the captain, who's been around for a long time. And Dan Coates has been out for a couple of weeks, and these younger guys have come in and really stepped up, and the transition game has been so much improved for Rochester. Brad Gillies coming over from Halifax was a huge offseason pickup that doesn't really get talked about a lot over the league, but just a guy like that who's willing to come in and do all those little things and doesn't care about stats, but wants to, do well. And a guy like Matt Gilray, who's unselfish in that transition game. This is a group of just unselfish guys who all play together, and they play together and they love it. And, they've talked all season. They don't care what other people say about them. They don't care if people think that, they're the Knighthawks from last year, or they're not legit. And they're like, you know what? We're just going to go keep doing what we're doing. We're going to go keep winning games and just keep proving people wrong. And I think that makes the makeup of a great team, is the fact that these guys, they're unselfish, number one. And number two, they all care about each other so much that the only stat that they care about is that W at the end of the game. And they don't care how it comes. They don't care who gets this stat or that stat or the goals, assists, loose balls. They just want to win games. And that's, I think, what's going to make them so dangerous in the stretch.
Yeah, that unselfishness, that team first mentality definitely goes a long way. It's what helped my Philadelphia Eagles get to the Super Bowl.
So close.
I'm not crying. But honestly, in all seriousness, when you look across sports, across the league, some of the best teams that ever come through are those teams where everybody understands their role. They're happy with their role. They just want to win games. And they want to, as you say, focus on that most important stat, getting the W. Well, Brendan, we appreciate you so much for taking time to join us. Apologies on the tech issues, but I'm so thankful that it worked because you were able to shine some great insight on what's going on in Rochester. And we would love to have you on again in the future, especially as we are talking more about the Knighthawks and their success. So thank you for joining us here on Daily Dive.
Thanks a lot, Renee, for the time. I appreciate it. Anytime. I'd love to join you anytime.
Awesome. Say less. We'll have you back on for sure. That's our special guest by Fanatics, Brendan McDaniel, Knighthawks analyst, talking about what's going on in Rochester as the Knighthawks now have a bye week and don't have to take the field again until next weekend on the 25th when they face off against the New York Riptide. Well, we've got to give our final segment of Power Rankings. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back here on Daily Dive to wrap up the show with Power Rankings. Welcome back to Daily Dive. We have our last brew. Get your coffee mugs ready. It's time for our last brew by B-Res Coffee Company as we have to get into our top 5 teams after all the excitement we saw this past weekend. Be sure to use the code Daily Dive at checkout, as you see on your screen, to check out all the phenomenal flavors that B-Res Coffee Company has to offer. All right, Producer Mike, we just heard from Brendan McDaniels about the Knighthawks. Definitely a top 5 team to say the least. But I'm going to let you go first and see what your top 5 teams are in order, starting with your number 5.
Okay. So my 5 was set in stone until that guy came on the show and sold me on a team. Okay. So originally, it's going to be a little shake up in my mind, so let me gather here. Number 5 for me, the Seals. And I don't even know if they're number 5 anymore. I know they've got one loss, but boy, you remember the New York Giants, and I hate bringing this up for you, but the New York Giants were like the worst 7-1 team of all time or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. That's the Seals. Number 4, the Calgary Roughnecks. CDB is in nets, and when he's on it, just Google this past weekend and tell me how they did in back-to-back wins. Was it at home? Yeah. Are the Rush and Mammoth slumping again? Maybe. But Calgary's got a really good team. Got a borderline great team. Their home field advantage might be second to none, but Calgary looks really good. Number 3 was Rochester. It's not anymore. It's Toronto. I have another stat for you here. Tom Schreiber, despite peppering the net with a bunch of shots on goal, only has like a 20% shooting percentage. And I sung his praises, but maybe more than I should have. Nick Rosie, has been great. But the top 2 teams are better than that. Number 2 is going to be the Rochester Knighthawks are number 2. The Knighthawks are number 2 because they were number 3, like I said, and they jumped to number 2 because the togetherness. I loved hearing that. They don't care that this Connor Fields guy came in and took all the bacon. They're like, hey, we still got some, eggs over here. We're doing good. We're feeding ourselves. We're great. Ron Hartley, if he was a little bit more consistent, they might be number 1. But that title goes to Matt Vince and Dane Smith, whether it be without Josh Brenner or not. Dane Smith is an MVP candidate, or I do think Connor Fields might be number one. I think Bandits are number one because they have the most consistent goalie. But Rylan, you are right there, pal.
Interesting. I had bacon and eggs for breakfast. Look, you now have agreed with me. My power rankings are the exact same. They were always like that before Brendan even came on the show. And I'll explain. I do think San Diego's holding on by a thread. I think they're simply just there because who'd they play last weekend? Exactly. Because they just haven't had games, because they just are sitting at 6-1, they are squeezing by teams. I think they're gonna, unfortunately, unless they can figure out defensively what they need to do, they might be dropping out of the top 5. I do have my honorable mentions because I love to give honorable mentions. I gave it to Calgary, and you see how that played out. Here they are in the top 5, having swept their doubleheader weekend. Panther City and Halifax one of those teams are cracking our top 5 soon. I don't know if it'll be this weekend, but they are rising sleepers. They've been we've been sleeping on them, I should say. And we're waking up. We got to rub the sleepies out of our eyes because Halifax and I actually do have to rub something out of my eye. Halifax and Panther City are here, and they're here to stay. Ow! Oh, my metaphor went wrong. So I'm gonna have the same top 4. Buffalo still sitting at number 1. I do think Buffalo is just an advanced version of Rochester, in the sense that they've been together for years. They're big players. You bring in a Hoga, obviously, last year, but they're big 3 and Matt Vince between the pipes, and then Josh Byrne and Dane Smith have been playing together forever. And then obviously they even play together in the PLL. So that chemistry is something that's hard to match. But Rochester does have that selflessness. I was saying that everybody's appreciating, understanding their roles. They're bought in, and that makes them a dangerous team and definitely number 2 above Toronto. So we're on the same boat here. For once, I know, which is never a good thing. I don't like agreeing with you. And
I like the picks being different more than this, though. I can deal with that.
Yeah, that's true. It's pretty hard to be different on top 5 rankings.
I do want to say this, though, real quick. There's a stat that's going to come across Daily Dive on Twitter page tomorrow. Probably shouldn't say, but I'm going to anyways. There are only 3 teams this year with multiple quarters of 30 goals or more.
Ooh.
Buffalo and Rochester, and the third team, Halifax. And they've got 3 quarters of 30 or more goals. But they play an all-around complete game. So wow. Halifax might be your team that you're going to crack your top 5, like you said.
Huh. Well, with that, we'll keep an eye on them. Halifax and Panther City, 2 sleepers. Don't sleep on them anymore. Panther City is actually playing in our Daily Dive game of the week this weekend as they take on the Mammoths, sitting at 500. Now, at 5-4, Panther City, this is going to be a great opportunity for them to wake some more people up, get some more attention, and we'll see what happens there. We will talk about that game in our game previews and all of the action this weekend in our Friday edition of Daily Dive. So we've given our power rankings, we've given our thoughts, we've got more to share tomorrow in our final episode of the week here on Daily Dive. As always, be sure to follow us and check out more at Daily Dive Lax. As producer Mike just said, we're dropping stats, we're dropping attendance, we're breaking stories, we're breaking trades and news and updates and injuries. Lots going on at Daily Dive Lax across social media. So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode. For producer Mike, our big guest presented by Fanatics of the episode, Brendan McDaniels. I'm Renee Washington saying, have a great rest of your Thursday and so long from Daily Dive. Tomorrow.